Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome. This is a second, less entertaining welcome than the last one, but nevertheless heartfelt. My name is Colin Thuburn. I'm president of the Royal Society of Literature. Many of you will remember that last year, when the Booker Prize shortlist was announced, it was greeted with universal applause, very unusual for the normally curmudgeonly literary community we have. This applause was not just for its international reach, but for the rich and unusual talent that was displayed throughout. Tonight, we are exceptionally lucky. We have a unique interview between the chair of the judges, Robert Macfarlane, and the winner from New Zealand, the remarkable Eleanor Catton. Our event has two very generous sponsors. First, Intelligent Life, the distinguished bi-monthly magazine of The Economist. Intelligent Life, it sets out to bring a rather different slant to cultural events, and in fact features many, or a good many, of the finest writers in the country. If any of you have not been able to get hold of copies, they're available free at the exits all around you. I would say that this issue, and I'm pretty sure it's this issue, has Robert Macfarlane, our own interviewer here, the very much applauded writer on landscape. Each issue, he contributes an essay on an imaginary or fictional landscape. And for this issue, unsurprisingly, it is celebrating the world of Eleanor Catton's Luminaries. Our second sponsor is the Australia and New Zealand Festival of Literature and the Arts. This is a 4-day festival starting on the 29th of March, ending on the 1st of June. And it features not only Australian and New Zealand writers, but British writers talking or entertaining ideas and themes that are Australasian. The tickets for the festival are going on sale today, and you should find flyers around which will introduce you to the website. On the final day, which is June the 1st, we at the Royal Society of Literature are having a joint event with the festival once again. This is featuring the very accomplished Australian writer, Helen Garner, in conversation with Helen Simpson. So over in a moment to Robert Macfarlane. Robert, as you will know, is the great celebrator of the wild places that we imagine have almost vanished. He almost single-handedly sometimes seems to resurrect them into our consciousness. Robert is vastly overworked. He not just by his own books, but by essays, librettos, trusteeships, not to mention a burgeoning family and a full-time post at Cambridge. So we are very lucky to have him. He had vowed a while ago that he was never, for many months, going to accept any extraneous invitations. A few days later, we invited him to interview Eleanor Catton, and his resolve quickly dwindled away. I think he's forgiven us. Thank you, and please welcome Robert and Eleanor.
Thank you very much for that warm welcome. Thank you to Colin for that introduction. I can see almost nobody, just the first few ranks, so I know there are only a couple of dozen people in here. That's what I'm going to pretend. I want to go back to the last time I saw Eleanor before this evening, which was October the 15th at the Guildhall. And it's an evening I will remember for many reasons. I was incredibly nervous. I don't get nervous very easily these days, but I remember sitting on a seat in the Guildhall before everyone else had arrived. The police were busy sweeping the place for explosive devices in advance of HRH's arrival. And I was busy trying to memorize my speech, but the sniffer dogs were just fascinated by my ankles. And it's very difficult to memorize a speech when your ankles are being sniffed by security canines. I remember also I shared a table with Ben Ockrey, who is a former winner of the Man Booker Prize, and he is an irrepressible presence, as anyone who's shared a table with him will know. And the first half of that evening featured short films about each of the shortlisted titles. And Ben devoted himself to a poker player's reading of my face as each of these films was played. And each of my ear waggles or inadvertent eyebrow twitches was subjected to the Ockrey interpretation technique. And after we'd seen the six, he said, "I'm going to tell you who's going to win based on your facial expression." And then we got into a conversation about poker, and he said, "You play poker?" I said, "I play poker." He said, "Let's go and play poker now. Don't worry about that speech. Let's just go head to head and play some poker." I said, "Look, I've really got to make this speech. It's very important." But I should have taken him up on it because he picked completely the wrong winner based on my facial expressions. But the two occasions I will really remember both involve Eleanor. And there was the moment when I announced that the Luminaries had won, and suddenly every camera in the room swooped onto you, and everyone in the room and the millions of people watching wanted to see your face, and you were absolutely stock still for a couple of seconds. And then you dived down to your handbag, and you took ages getting your speech. I was thinking, where is it? Has it fallen through a hole in the floor? And I now know it's because we asked all the shortlisted writers to write a speech in case they won. And am I right to think you'd superstitiously buried it
Yes.
at the very bottom as defense against the possibility of thinking that you might have won? And then I took you upstairs, and there was the final press conference, and I stepped back, and you stepped forward, and the world's media went flashbulb crazy. And I just watched you there, and I just thought, everything has just changed. And I suppose I wanted to ask you, that's a very roundabout way of asking you, what's changed and what has stayed the same since that night?
Well, it's funny, I learned afterwards in that moment the internet broke in New Zealand. And so my parents, who were trying to find the result online, suddenly everything went down, and had to turn on the national radio. And the morning announcer is a very celebrated New Zealand, obviously it was morning there, a very celebrated New Zealand journalist named Catherine Ryan, got so excited about the result that all she kept on saying was, "We have a result, we have a result." And
what result?
Yes. And my poor parents had to find out about 15 minutes later, I think, when everyone had calmed down. But it's a funny, in so many respects, so many things have changed. This kind of thing is fairly normal now, which is very extraordinary. I've been given opportunities to travel and to see my book read by such a wider, readership, a kind of an astonishingly wide readership from all over the world. So that's been. That's kind of taken a bit of adjustment in me. But in the same way, I'm sure we'll talk about this because this is kind of one of the themes of the novel. Nothing's changed at all because, this is the task that is before me now is the same task that is before every writer with every book that they write, which is to write a book that's good and a book that other people will want to love. It's a kind of it's a funny mix of everything and nothing. Well, perhaps we'll talk about that too.
Well, the tasks in a way contradict one another. It's the famous idea that when you write a book as good as yours and that incites the interest that yours has, it's impossible to write another book because there are so many people who want to hear from you and see you and meet you and talk to you and write to you. It's a huge pressure, I know, and of course many people want you to cast their horoscope as well. And Ellie, wrote a very beautiful short horoscope for one of the other judges, Stuart Kelly, and Stuart shared it with me, and of course it began, "You have made a wise decision recently." But
That's not true.
no, that is not. That is not true. And we'll say no more about it, apart from that it was an utterly gorgeous piece of prose as well. I find it hard to imagine you writing anything other than an elegant sentence or paragraph, but I just remember reading it and thinking, this is extraordinary. But I want to begin to move towards the novel, and I want to think about something we both share, which is a love of landscape. And you wrote, again, an absolutely gorgeous essay, I think, very subtle for The Guardian, called The Land of the Long White Cloud, about your relationship with the New Zealand landscape. And we both had parents who, I think, dragged us up mountains, sometimes against our volition, on taking us to places that felt special and sacred and consoling. And there's this funny mix of beauty and duty where they're saying, come on, keep walking. I wanted to ask about how landscape features in the novel, how you researched place and your sense of place in it.
Well, that's a great question. Well, I think that for people who began hiking and walking as a child, as we both did, I think that it does shape you in a way. I think that it does shape the way that you regard any kind of act of effort. Mm-hmm. I was thinking about this recently, and thinking about the fact that when you walk up a mountain with your family, every single person in the party is doing exactly the same thing. There's no one person that is doing kind of, is climbing more of a mountain than anybody else. And so in some way, everybody's ownership of the experience is completely individual, and it's a kind of a solitude. They have their kind of, that mountain is something that they did without help. And I think that one of the things you see very often in New Zealand, probably everywhere in the world, when you're out hiking, is you'll get to the top of a peak somewhere and you'll be feeling very just kind of sweaty and unattractive, and you probably don't smell very good, but you've arrived at the view, and that you've got the sense of accomplishment, and then you start hearing these chopper blades, and a helicopter will come down right next to you, and some people looking very attractive kind of jump out of the helicopter, and kind of look disdainfully at you and you at them.
What do they do? Do they take part in photo shoots, or
just,
do they?
Yeah, I mean, well, not with us. I mean, we spoil the view. But I think what's funny about this experience is that effort is something that you cannot buy. In a funny kind of way, the experience that these people are buying by paying for this helicopter ride and coming up to the peak of the mountain is they haven't bought what you as the hiker have done. They've bought something completely different, and I think that there is something in that I think that has shaped me, maybe my beliefs or my spiritual sense of the world. Mm-hmm. This idea that effort is individual, and that that it is impossible to buy a view. That my father had two kind of most hated refrains in our house. One was nature looks more beautiful in the rain, which we did not appreciate, and the other one was that a view needs to be deserved. You can't, it's a kind of perspective, really. That the perspective that you get from a car window is just fundamentally, or from a helicopter window, is fundamentally different from the perspective that you've earned in some way. And so that doesn't really speak to writing, I guess. But
how did you, it is a novel with an astonishingly strong sense of place, a sense of place so strong that it's already drawing readers to the place where it occurred. And I wondered whether you rewalked all of the landscapes in which the novel occurs, or how you imagined that very strong sense of place into being.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I actually started writing the Luminaries when I was living overseas. I was living in Iowa, and my grandma, who had intensely disliked my first book, and had very famously said, "Eleanor has not found her genre yet," which has now become a kind of a catchphrase in my family, knew that I was wanting to write a Goldfield story, and she started sending me, it was so sweet really, she started going down to the library where she lives in Timaru in the South Island of New Zealand, and going to the microfiche and sending me the shipping news, which I really liked because she was sending me the shipping news across the sea, you know. There was something just very beautiful about that. But I suppose I had maybe about 40,000 words or 100 or so pages of the novel before I even returned to New Zealand. And I did so to take up a residency in Christchurch, which I'd been awarded I guess about 2 weeks before the fatal earthquake there. And was quite, I wasn't sure whether I really wanted to go back, but because I grew up in Christchurch, I felt it would be disloyal not to. And so came back later on that year with my partner from the States, and finally was living in a place that was quite close to Hokitika and only about 3 hours drive away over the mountains. And we made, I think, maybe 2 or 3 trips. It wasn't very many trips to Hokitika in that time. I remember the last one was very perplexing to Steve, my partner, because we'd taken the whole weekend off, we'd booked a place to stay. We drove over the mountains, it took a while. I parked the car, walked out onto the spit, looked this way and looked this way, and then I said, yep, okay, that's fine, we're good. But it is a part of New Zealand that I know very, very well, the West Coast. My sister's lived on the West Coast for a long time, and she has a family there. And I think that it's quite hard to describe if you haven't been there, but the landscape is incredibly dramatic in the sense that you have this very, very savage sea on the one hand, a relatively narrow corridor of land in the middle, and then these quite savage and impassable peaks on the other. And the sense of kind of always being oriented between calamities or between dangers is very, very ever present there. And the coast, I think it rains around about 200 days a year there. It rains for virtually all of my book. And so the rainforest is very, very lush. And when I started researching the book, I was intrigued by the dangers that were in the path of these people who wanted to go to this place and make their fortune. At the time when gold was discovered, a passage over the mountains hadn't yet been found, and the only way in was by ship. But the landing, not only at Hokitika but all up, in harbours north and south of that town, were just incredibly treacherous. And one of the details I found was that they would call drowning the West Coast disease. They would say that somebody had the West Coast disease if they had drowned. So that kind of captured my interest, this intersection between really, an enterprise that is about trying to get rich, but also this incredibly hostile natural environment that is gloriously, achingly beautiful, but also, very, 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 very savage.
You do get that sense of the novel occurring on a very thin strip. There's the movement inland and uphill to the cottage, to Crossbell's cottage, but otherwise it's the beach. It's where the rivers come down and bring the wealth, and it's a novel that stretches, and then you have this murderous sea and then the high ground watching it all. It interested me actually when I went back and reread the novel in advance of this meeting and writing about it. It interested me how indoors it was. There's something I wrote briefly about in Intelligent Life, that actually it happens inside a great deal. And we're in courtrooms, and we're in hotel bars, and we're in opium dens, and we're in shacks and so forth. And I wondered if you were aware of it as you wrote it being a very interior novel in that sense.
That's a really interesting question. My first editor that I worked with on the book, actually, Sarah Holloway at Granta, made that very comment where she said that she felt that she had a very good sense of the interiors of the town, but not a very good sense of the exteriors. And it was one of the things that I had in mind when I kind of went back and kind of built kind of painted the backdrop, as it were. But yeah, no, I mean, that's a really interesting thing to say. I think that perhaps that has something to do with the structure of the book depending so much on connections between characters, and that these happening from a novelist's point of view more easily indoors than outdoors, because outdoor connections are so often by chance, and if you have too many chance connections, your novel's going to start to seem a little bit like a soap opera.
Well, Virginia Woolf says somewhere, the hardest task any novelist face is getting a character out of one room and into another. And I thought, well, you get a lot of characters out of rooms and into other rooms really, really well, and disprove that. I want to ask another spatial question, which actually emerges out of that idea of characters meeting and intersecting. So I kept trying, as I read the novel, to imagine it as a structure. And by a structure, I mean not a flat map, but a form that existed within 4 dimensions. And I couldn't. The best and the closest I could come up with was this wonderful word orrery, this which we've talked about, which these gorgeous structures that represented planetary motions and orbital intersections, and these gorgeous brass and bronze beings that we know from the early modern period through to the, I guess, early 20th century, though I'm sure some are being made. But even that doesn't come close to catching it. And I wondered how you kept the structure in your own mind. Did you have a map? Did you make matchstick cathedrals? Did you construct orreries? Did you use computer programs? It is so complex.
Yes, well, yes to the computer programs, and I like the idea of a matchstick cathedral. I might try that. Very early on in writing the book, I lit upon the idea of seeing if, well, I mean, it wasn't really an idea, it was more of an ambition or a notion, that I wanted to see if I could take the archetypes of the classical zodiac, which is possessed of both fixed and moving parts. This is one of the really interesting things about the zodiac. Obviously, because the Earth spins, the 12 signs of the zodiac appear to rotate around the Earth at a fixed rate. And at a fixed speed. But there are also, planets. The Greek word for planet, the etymology of the word planet is wandering star, and their motion is very unpredictable. And, just because of the placement of the Earth as the third rock from the sun, the outer planets often seem to vacillate between one sign and the next for quite, whereas Mercury and Venus and Mars spin around and kind of move much more rapidly. But anyway, I kind of had this idea that I wanted to take all of these archetypes and turn them into some sort of a plot, and I didn't really know the end to which how could I make that happen really. But my father, who is a kind of an amateur an astronomer, or an astronomy enthusiast, I guess, had sent me an article, I think, and on this article there was a link to the starandtelescope.com website. This is an astronomy magazine. And I discovered this computer program online on this website where you could put in the longitudinal position of anywhere on Earth and dial back the date actually to any date in history. I think that it goes back to, this one only goes back to about 500 BC, but it's still quite incredible. And not only can you see exactly where the planets are for every single world event, but you can also see the phases of the moon and all sorts. And so I thought, okay, this is really cool. And I plugged in the date that gold was first discovered in Hokitika, which was actually in 1864. And just started watching the skies revolve, and I just took notes of what I was seeing, thinking that if something exciting was there, it would present itself to me as some sort of a story. At the time, I'd been reading a lot of Jung, the psychologist Jung, and he'd actually kind of led me to astrology as a sequence of archetypes. I hadn't realized the extent to which the 12-part story of the zodiac is in fact a 12-part story with a beginning and an ending, but that kind of quite cunningly bends back on itself between Virgo and Libra, so that the second half is in effect a retelling of the first. And by the time you get to Pisces, the last sign, you've kind of created a total self-reflexivity that only Aries, the first sign, can kind of bust out of, if that makes sense. Yeah. So Jung was in my mind, and I knew from having read some of his writings that he believed that Sagittarius, which is associated with the 9th house of the zodiac, or the kind of the 9th 30-degree segment around the wheel, he associated Sagittarius with the collective unconscious. In astrology, classical astrology, Sagittarius is associated with the house of journeys, and for Jung, this journey was kind of the ultimate journey of every human being, is the journey into kind of the mythic consciousness that we all share. And so while I was watching the skies go round, I saw I saw a triple conjunction in Sagittarius on the 27th of January 1866, which is the day in which the book begins. And I also noticed something that also excited me, which is in that year in 1866, from Hokitika, there was this quite strange phenomenon where it doesn't happen very often, where there was a full moon just before the 1st of February, and then another full moon just after the last day of February. And what astrologers call this is a month without a moon. Obviously the moon is still there, but there is no full moon because February is a short month. And these two things seemed very exciting to me, so I thought, I'll start here. I mean, it seems kind of accidental. I mean, it was extremely accidental in lots of ways. The three planets that were in conjunction were Mercury, the planet that governs our reason, our logic, our communicative powers. Jupiter, that governs our social sense, and also Mars, our kind of sense of activity and how we're going to achieve our ambitions. And I suddenly, this conjunction, I mean, yeah, I'm worried that if I kind of keep going down this road, it's going to take too long to explain.
Okay,
but,
well,
and I'm going to lose the faith of everybody.
I don't know if you've written to the programmers, because I feel there's this amazing origin in this remarkable program that allows you to dial back astronomical history, and that then presented you with this convergence in skies that we could never otherwise have known, and that out of which emerged this incredible novel. But
well, actually, after having done a lot of the research on this one program, I found that the Apple computers have got an extraordinary app called Stellarium, which I then used, after I kind of had begun the novel, in placing the events of the subsequent 11 parts. I could be fairly choosy, if you know what I mean, in terms of where I wanted the moon to be, and some of the smaller planets do move around quite a bit. And so the subsequent program ended up being even more helpful. One of the reasons for that, I really recommend it if you have a Mac computer and want to check it out, is that it will not only show you Western constellations, but also constellations from all other cultures that you could possibly imagine, including Maldi, New Zealand Maldi. So I was able to see the skies as Te Reo Te Whare, my Māori character, would have seen them. One of the things that was extraordinary to me was that, Orion, when I look at obviously in New Zealand, Orion is upside down, so he's kind of going like this with his sword, or his club, I should say. But in Māori culture, and certainly at this time, they wouldn't have seen the 3 stars as Orion's belt. They saw that as the keel of a catamaran. And when I kind of switched into Māori mythology and saw the Māori pictures instead of the Western ones, all of a sudden I could see that too, and it was quite interesting. You know, there are just, you know, so many possible pictures that you can read into these chance scatters of stars. It's quite an extraordinary thing.
I think there's a term for it called patternicity, which is or apophenia, the interpretation of pattern within randomly distributed data, as it were. And in a sense, that's what the novel is about so many things, but it's about the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of the ways in which we behave towards one another. And of course, that gorgeous sense of constellation pattern picking becomes, as you say, incredibly reflexive and begins to determine the ways the characters see the ways we read as well, and make sense of what is unfolding before us in these strange orders. I'm just going to check how we're doing. Okay, we started a little bit late. There are so many things I want to ask you, but there is a reading that's going to come very soon from the legendary actress Kerry Fox, who is, I'm rather envious. She's going to get the pulpit. She's going to appear soon, but not quite yet. I don't know quite where she is. I wanted to prepare for that, because one of the characters in Kerry's reading is Lydia Wells, who is such an extraordinary, strong presence in this very male-dominated novel. And I wanted to ask you about a particular word, and the word is whore. And I remember when I met it for the very first time in the novel, you meet it very early on, and it's used absolutely casually. It's just a denominative term. Anna Wetherall is not named. That's what she is. She's a whore. And as you read on, it didn't lose any of its power to shock for me, but I realized that its pair word, as it were, was or, that whore and or began to perform this complicated dance of relation with one another, and indeed that or was what had turned Anna into whore. But I just wondered about using it, and when you first used it, and how it felt to use that word about this female character who becomes so central to the novel.
That's a really interesting question. That had occurred to me, actually. I'd written a short story that was set in the gold rush when I was kind of working up to beginning writing the Luminaries. And it had struck me that both California and Victoria, the two kind of biggest gold rushes of that period, both had or as their central syllable, California and Victoria.
Right.
And so I'd kind of been thinking about that, and discovered, to my delight in my research, that very often women, especially women, but also men, would sew gold dust into the linings of their clothes in order to evade paying taxes at the custom house. And women were much better than men for this purpose, because it was kind of, not very polite to frisk a woman. And so very often women would be leaving New Zealand with just these most extraordinary fortunes that they were bearing away on their bodies, which of course, when you're thinking about the stars, has quite a nice, the idea of eclipses and kind of borrowed light, and that comes in with the moon, and also the idea that every one of the astrological planets has its associated metal, with gold being the sun's metal and silver being the moon's. But it's funny, I was at a literary festival in Australia about a month ago, and seeing a children's writer on stage saying something that I'd never really thought about before. Her name's Catherine Jinks. She's a really extraordinary Australian children's writer. And she said that she never feels any compunction killing her own characters, but she loathes it when other writers kill characters in books that she's reading. And she has this very funny double standard that, she's quite cavalier about killing her own characters because they belong to her, so of course she can do whatever she likes with them. And it's interesting that you say that about the word whore, because I think that, it's very... It is a shock, isn't it? It's not a word that I would ever use, I think, and yet I kind of felt no compunction in using it in the novel. A comparable moment to that was the death of one of the major characters in the book that I kind of executed quite gleefully, actually. And when I read that passage aloud, I read my work aloud to my partner every night. He was just so upset with me. He was furious, and he burst into tears. And we had this terrible, terrible fight about it. I think he called me a monster. I think it was very funny. But
I think this is the sign of a novel that's really working when your own partner resents the execution of one of your characters by you. But I mean, clearly it embodies a whole worldview. I mean, it's to do with that sense of this capitalized world where everything is assessed according to its value, to the dividends it can provide, whether that's a mine or a purchase or a hotel or a whore who's going to be bought and then used. And clearly the relations between women as resource and mine as resource, and these often ghastly men who work people, indentured labour as well. And I think the novel is very brave and very clever and insightful about these what money does to relations in that universe.
Yeah, I mean, I feel very strongly that love and money are opposite. Not that they are. In a way, they have a kind of a paradoxical relationship, I think. I think that it's impossible to. Well, I don't think I feel. I know that it's impossible to buy love. You cannot make somebody love you. But at the same time, strangely, it's impossible to love money. I think. I think that when we. I don't know if anybody here, I certainly have never done this, has kind of pulled a £5 note out of their pocket and just kind of, looked at it in rapture. I don't
think anyone's going to fess up to that.
We see through money to what it could buy. And if we love it, we don't really love it. We love it in a way it's kind of invisible or transient. There's a line quite early on in the book, this idea of capital having no memory. It's you cannot put your stamp on currency. It'll just once you spend it forgets you, And obviously, love is not at all like that. You cannot forget being loved. And so for me, this kind of polar opposite, this polarity, I should say, between these two things. I wanted to use it as a kind of thematic axis in the book and string out every relationship and every event in the book on this axis in some way.
Well, that happens, and it's something I want to ask you more about. But it seems this relationship between love and money is a very good moment to hear from Lydia in the form of Kerry. So if Kerry Fox, are you out there? I feel like I'm in a séance now.
I don't get the pulpit, but I like being called legendary, and that was good. Lydia Wells always seemed to arrange herself in postures of luxury so that she might be startled out of them, laughing when someone approached. In the parlour of the Wayfarer Hotel, Gascoigne discovered her stretched out on the sofa with her slipper dangling free from her toe, one arm flung wide and her head thrown back against the pillow. She was clasping a pocket-sized novel in the other hand, quite as if the book were an accessory to a feint. Her rouged cheek and titillated aspect had been manufactured in the moments prior to Gascoigne's entrance, though the latter did not know it. They suggested to him, as was the woman's intention, that the narrative in which she had been engrossed was a very licentious one. When Gascoigne rapped on the door frame, as a courtesy only, for the door was open, Lydia Wells roused herself, opened her eyes wide, and gave a tinkling laugh. She closed the book with a snap and then tossed it onto the ottoman so that its cover and title were well in the man's full view. Gascoigne bowed. Rising from the bow, he let his gaze linger upon her, relishing the sight, for Lydia Wells was a woman of ample beauty and a pleasure to behold. She was perhaps 40 years of age, though she might have been a mature-seeming 30 or a youthful 50. The precise figure she would not disclose. "Monsieur Gascoigne," she said, relishing the name, drawing it out. "But you are alone." "I convey regrets," Gascoigne said. Gascoigne shook his head and recounted as briefly as he was able the tale of Anna's gun misfiring in her hand. He told the truth. Lydia made noises of alarm. "I am so sorry that you could not be here to tell her yourself," Gascoigne said rather automatically. But as Lydia eased her foot back into her slipper, lifting her skirts to show her stockinged plumpness of her calves, Gascoigne reflected that he was not, in fact, particularly sorry. "But the expedition is easily postponed," said Lydia. "Unless you would like to come shopping in Anna's place. Perhaps you cherish a passion for women's hats." "I could feign a passion," Gascoigne said, and Lydia laughed again. "Passion," she said in a low voice, "is not to be feigned." She rose from the sofa and went to the sideboard where a plain bottle and 3 glasses were set out on a wooden tray. "I'm not surprised, you know," she added, turning 2 of the glasses right side up and leaving the third upended. "You mean about the pistol? You're not surprised she tried to take her life again?" "Oh, heavens, no, not that." Lydia paused, the bottle in her hand. "I'm not surprised you're here alone." Gascoigne flushed. I did as you asked," he said. "I did not give your name. I told her it was a surprise going with a woman to look at hats. I said she was pleased with the idea. She could have come. She would have come. It was only this business with the pistol." He felt he was gabbling. What a fine woman she was, the widow Wells. How smartly the ruffled bustle curved away from her. "You've been ever so kind to humour my silliness," said Lydia Wells, soothing him. "I tell you, when a woman approaches my age, she likes to play the fairy godmother. She likes to wave her wand about and make magic for the betterment of younger girls. No. I knew that you'd not spoiled my surprise. I simply had a premonition that Anna would not come. I have premonitions, Aubert." She brought Gascoigne his glass, carrying with her the sharp and cloudy scent of fresh-cut lemons, for she had bleached her skin and nails with lemon juice that morning. "But I am sure that if she'd known it was you, she would have rallied in a heartbeat." "She would have rallied." "Poor Anna Wetherell," said Lydia Wells. "That girl is a very picture of ill luck." "Poor Anna," he agreed aloud. "You are right. She is a wretched picture. She cannot make rent, and her landlord has cast her out." Gascoigne spoke with admiration and pity. Lydia leapt up. "Oh, but she must come and live with me. She must." "Would she want it, do you think?" "Poor Anna adores me," Lydia said firmly. "We are the closest of friends. We're 2 doves, or we were, at least, in Dunedin last year. You must make her come. I shall take her under my wing. I shall spoil her." "Are you always so good to your charges?" Gascoigne said, smiling. "I have a vision of you, the lady with the lamp, moving from bedside to bedside, ministering kindness." "It is well you spoke that word," Lydia said. "Kindness?" "No. Vision. Oh, Aubert, I'm bursting with news." "News about the estate," Gascoigne said. "So soon?" But Lydia was shaking her head. No, she said, nothing to do with that. You must ask me what I've been doing since I saw you last. I've been aching for you to ask." "Tell me, do." Lydia sat erect, opened her eyes, her grey eyes wide so that they sparkled. "I have bought an hotel," she said. "An hotel?" Gascoigne said, marvelling. "Which hotel?" "This one." "This? You think me capricious?" She clapped her hands together. "I think you enterprising and brave and very beautiful," said Gascoigne, "and 1,000 other things." "I intended to convert the place," Lydia said. "You know, I'm a worldly woman. I'm quite the entrepreneur, Aubert. You have not seen me in my element." Gascoigne looked about him. "What conversions will you make?" "We come at last to my vision," Lydia said. She leaned forward. "Did you see the séance advertised in this morning's paper?" "Oh, come, no." Lydia raised her eyebrows. "Oh, come, no, what?" table-turning and spirits, Gascoigne smiled. You ought not to try and profit from a parlour trick. The realm of the paranormal is not a trick, Aubert. Now come, Gascoigne said again. This is entertainment you're speaking of, not prophecy. So, you're a cynic. She pretended to be disappointed. If I'm a cynic, I am a discerning cynic, Gascoigne said loftily. I've been to several séances, Mrs. Wells. If I dismiss them as foolish superstition, I do not do so out of hand. She hesitated. Then her plump hand shot out and pressed his sleeve. No, it's not that. She stroked the fabric of his cuff a moment and then withdrew her hand just as quickly. You're not to call me Mrs. Wells for very much longer. Gascoigne bowed his head. No. Lydia bit her lip and then leaned in close and whispered, I am to be married. Married? Yes, as soon as I dare, but it's a secret. A secret from me? From everyone. I am not to know the name of your beloved? No, not you, not anyone. This is my clandestine love affair, Lydia said. She giggled. I suppose I ought to offer my congratulations, Gascoigne said, cordially enough, but with a new reservation, for his hopes had been somewhat dashed by the news. He felt that a shaft of possibility had closed, a light had been extinguished, a door slammed. Virtually since he first laid eyes upon the woman, Gascoigne had fantasized that Lydia Wells might one day become his lover. It had seemed simply natural. She was a widow. He was a widower. They were both strangers in an unfamiliar town. It was not so very unlikely that they might fall in love. But now that he knew that Lydia Wells was betrothed, Gascoigne was forced to relinquish his fantasy. And to relinquish his fantasy, he had to acknowledge it and see it for the foolishness it was. At first, he felt sorry for himself. But as soon as he turned his mind upon the sorrow, he found that its shallowness amused him. I'm happiness itself, the widow said. Gascoigne smiled. What am I to call you then, if I cannot call you Mrs. Wells? Oh, Aubert, said the widow. We are the very best of friends. You do not have to ask. Of course you must call me Lydia.
Thank you very much. The magnificently creepy Lydia Wells. And Gascoigne is as putty in her hands. It's one of the pleasures of the novel to see Lydia undone, actually, thinking of executions and comeuppances. But all this talk of love brings me to something else that I did very much want to ask about. And this is quite complicated terrain. It has to do with this idea of gift. And in the many discussions, this is the copy of the novel that I toted around for all those meetings and all those discussions, and I'm pleased to say that its spine is as creased as a book's spine can be. And I handed it to Ellie slightly nervously earlier because she wanted to look up the passage that was going to be read, thinking, oh gosh, are there going to be compromising marginalia in there? But of course the marginalia are all just admiring, really. And I've noticed there's a pencil scribble from me at some point in the judging process that says on the front, a novel that slowly stakes its claim upon you. And it certainly did that. And the strange thing about this novel, one of its many powers, is that each time I reread it, it gave more to me. And gift is very important in the novel. It's something we talked about in the judging meetings, and on the morning of the final meeting, as one of the judges was stuck in traffic on the M25, and I rather smugly had got to London about 4 hours early in my slightly neurotic way, I texted him and I said, this novel is all about gift. It's about gift and theft and the disruptive power of gift in the context of this astonishing capital culture that they inhabit. And then, of course, you got up and gave your speech, and one of the first names you mentioned was Lewis Hyde and his book, The Gift. And very briefly, the idea of the gift is that when you give or are given to, you then give on, that the gift lives by exchange, and that you don't have to reciprocate to the person who has given you this thing. That's the basis of capital, of market exchange. I give to you, you give to me something of the equivalent monetary worth, whereas the gift lives by circulation. And of course, the gift here is the £2,000 that Emery Staines is just so happy to give to Anna. And the gift is also the love that he gives her unconditionally, the unconditional gift. But when did gift become so important to the novel and to your thinking about it?
In a funny kind of way, it was always there. I did the, very, what I now would not recommend, this is a very unrecommendable thing in this novel, is with beginning with the title. I had the title long before I started writing the book. And the luminaries in astrology means the relationship between the sun and the moon. As luminous orbs, they're the only two of the 7 astrological planets, so-called planets, to give off light, and they have this symbiotic relationship. And as I said before, I was reading Jung at the time, and became very captivated with his idea of the animus and the anima, this idea that in a person's mind and spirit, I guess, we have the self that we present to the world that is visible, perhaps. And there is this counterweight behind that every kind of show has its shadow, and maybe in some cases has its cost, And so when I came upon this word, the luminaries, I thought, okay, I want to write a novel with that as the title, which is this. I don't recommend this as a way of proceeding. And that it was an avenue that kind of stayed open in my mind for a really long time. I can't quite talk about this without it being kind of horrifically spoilery. But
has everyone here read The Luminaries? Okay, we'll avoid spoilers. Have I avoided spoilers? I may have committed.
I think you have.
Okay, all right.
I think you have.
Let's make that policy then.
The problem with the idea of talking about the luminaries is that really I'm talking about the very last page of the book, and talking about a revelation that I think ought properly to be a dawning revelation on the reader's part. But I guess this, you were asking before about the word whore, and one of the things that I knew from the very beginning that I wanted to do with the book was, I should say first that Anna's profession presented itself to me quite naturally, actually, when I was thinking about how to turn the archetypes of the heavens into people. And I was thinking about the fact that this was a gold town. There weren't very many women around at that time, around about one woman for every 10 men in Hokitika. Thinking about the fact that the moon goes through every single one of the 12 signs every night, and then obviously also every month. So thinking that I would need some sort of a female character who had connections, and dalliances with a lot of men. At the time, though, I was reading a lot of 19th century fiction, and it started to really bother me that in a lot of 19th century fiction with female protagonists, the protagonist dies at the end. And I started wondering why it is that the woman always has to die. The woman who truly wakes up to herself, why she has to be killed at the end of, or to kill herself very often at the end of the novel. And so I thought, okay, I want to use this figure, this archetype, in a way that doesn't do that kind of gives Anna a selfhood, and doesn't just make her the repository of, or the kind of the reason for somebody else's self-realization. That's something that really bothers me with a lot of novels that use prostitutes as characters, that very often, I mean, it's a Portrait of the Artist is a good example of that, I guess. The prostitute becomes a kind of an occasion for another character's realization about themselves. And that always seemed to me quite an inhumane thing to do to a character, and I really didn't want to do that. So this is the kind of slightly spoilery, but ultimately not spoilery thing, I think that there's only really one character who really sees Anna kind of soul to soul, what Martin Buber, the theologian, would call an I-thou relationship. And all the other characters in the novel, although they use her for their own enjoyment, they don't really see her except for as a means to an end. And so that kind of that gift, I guess, was in a funny kind of way there from the very beginning. I had the ending. I knew that I wanted to have a story that in some way explores the relationship between the self and its shadow, the lucky side and the unlucky side, maybe. And Anna's fate and Emery's fate are very much intertwined in the book, and indeed mirror each other at every point. But I also knew that I wanted that to be kind of private, that I wanted that to be their love, and not only inaccessible to all of the other characters in the book, but in a funny kind of way also strangely inaccessible to the reader, because if that makes sense. I mean, I think that it's something that you hopefully feel by the end of the book, but you don't get to see. And I think that there's a difference between being able to see love played out and feeling it.
That is so such a wonderful answer and so interesting to me, because I couldn't work out how I'd seen so little of this love, and then the ending of the novel, which also benefits from this incredible momentum and focus that the structure of halves gives to it. Those who've read the novel will know that each subsequent section is half the length of its predecessor, which means that you begin very slowly, and then there's this incredible acceleration towards this final tiny section. And I couldn't work out how I was so flattened by, emotionally touched by a love that I had seen so little evidence of in practice on the page. And you've explained to me that was a deliberate decision on your part to shield it to make it private only to them. I find that amazing, and I've learnt something completely new about the novel talking to you in that way. I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to let the 742 people who want to ask you questions, because I've had more than my fair share. And it follows on from gift. The prize, the Man Booker Prize, was itself a kind of gift, I suppose. It's given to you, you don't seek it, nothing is asked of you in return. It was given to a novel about gift giving, about the importance of gift giving. And I know from talking to you and from our correspondence that the novel itself has given onwards. It's had all sorts of unexpected outcomes for you, of course, but you were telling me that Hokatika's GDP has quadrupled?
Oh, no, it's only doubled.
Only doubled. Since the novel was published. And of course, the gift that the novel gives to individual readers is unknowable to you, is private between the reader and the novel. But I just wondered if there were other unexpected outcomes to the novel that you could never have foreseen. I know. Tell us about the Maori receiving you onto their land.
Yeah, that actually was what I was going to, how I was going to answer that question. Very recently, I made a kind of, I suppose, a victory tour to Hokitika. They actually asked me to bring the Man Booker statue. I think they were thinking it was going to be like a rugby World Cup thing, where I was going to do some sort of a parade and hold it up, but I declined to bring it. But we were welcomed onto the marae, which is like a meeting house, a kind of a centre, in the Arahura Valley, which is just north of Hokitika, where much of the action of the book takes place, by the local iwi. and just had the most extraordinarily moving reception there. I was joined by my partner and also my British editor Max Porter and Andrew Woodhead, the producer who's since bought the TV rights for the Luminaries. And one of the features of a welcoming ceremony, which in Māori culture is called a pōwhiri, is that you are welcomed onto the marae by the elders of the community who will give speeches, kind of prayer-like speeches, and kind of tell you about the history of the place and perform oratory. And then the community will sing to you, and you are required to sing back, and you are required to respond to the gift of song with a gift of your own. And so on the way from Christchurch over the mountains, we had a rental van, and we practiced this song. We did an English round, because there were 4 of us. We practiced this song kind of countless times. It's still in my head, actually. And we're welcomed onto the marae as family. But the most extraordinary aspect of this welcoming ceremony was that I got to meet the real-life descendants of my fictional character, Toro Tauwhare. These sweet little kids in school uniforms who were just so proud to be descended from somebody who didn't exist, you know. It was really wonderful.
Well, there could hardly be a better place to end this section than that. Wonderful. I think we'll lift the lights, or at least such that I can see anyone. And then there are 2 microphones. I think we've got between 10 and 15 minutes of audience questions. And I will speak the question back, I guess, to make sure everyone's heard it. So, is it possible just to dim these 2 lights a tiny bit? The fog clears. Thank you very much. I'm afraid I really can't see people on the balcony, though. So unless you have go-go gadget arms. Any question? There's a question at the back there, as far from the microphone as could be. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm really interested in the way the characters perform their identities. The men particularly are so sort of wonderfully self-conscious and very aware of the public nature of their being and how they're being perceived. And it's a theme that you explored with your largely female characters in the rehearsal, that concept of femininity or gender as a kind of performance. And I'm just wondering if you could sort of speak to how you explored that, particularly in a non-20th century context.
Can I just check that was the audience able to hear that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that on the surface, my 2 books have, in a superficial way, they don't really have very much in common. But for me, I can see, quite a lot of similarities between them, and one of them is what you describe, this idea of, the extent to which our identities are handed to us, or that they are the property of external forces, and the extent to which they are something that cannot be touched by external forces. And I think that I've used the phrase paradox a little bit already, once already, and I think that this actually speaks to a theme at the heart of the Luminaries, which is the paradoxical relationship, as I see it, between fate and the will. This, for me, came to life very much in the Goldfields setting. This idea that you're setting out to make your fortune. What could be more of an act of will? At the same time, what it is that you're doing, especially on a Goldfields context, is walking into the hills, kneeling down, and picking up a piece of ore that has been there for probably at least thousands of years, if not more. So there's this kind of very interesting intersection, I think, between fate and the will. And the best, maybe not the best, but the most satisfying way that I can kind of formulate the relationship between those two things in my mind is that they are locked in a kind of a paradoxical relationship, in the sense that, you know, if I had known when I was writing the Luminaries that it was going to have this incredible prize bestowed upon it, it would have made the writing of it impossible. I would have never worked hard, you know. I mean, all of the fear and the doubt and then the kind of bullheadedness that kind of went into the writing of it would have just been meaningless, because I knew what the consequence was. And so I think that there is this sense that if you can see yourself from the outside, it's impossible to see yourself from the inside, if that makes sense. If you have the one perspective, it makes the other perspective impossible. If you know your fate, your will is meaningless. But at the same time, will, in a funny kind of way, seems to make fate meaningless. That, you know, we are all people with wills, and I could do anything I wanted right now. I mean, I won't, don't worry, but that presumably would be in defiance of fate, because I could just decide to do it, and then I would go off and do it. And so I think that it is very interesting that these two things are locked in this paradoxical relationship. And in my first book, I think that, you know, I was much younger when I was writing it, and I hadn't read as much. You know, I just read so much in the intervening years, and but I think that in a funny kind of way, it's maybe less sophisticated or more elemental working out of that same problem of interior and exterior, and how to reconcile them, which of course is impossible.
Thank you very much. There's a hand attached to a person there.
Thanks. I'm really interested in how you came to plot the book and the sort of mechanisms, the planetary motions that you used. I'm just sort of fascinated to know whether you ever felt sort of that you weren't in control of the plot, or whether you felt that constrained it, or if it sort of freed you to write what you wanted to in the plot.
Yeah, I never felt out of control. I felt frequently frustrated and very annoyed at myself for having kind of embarked on this journey. You know, like there were certain things that I knew that I wanted to achieve with the book. I feel that it's very important, for me at least, to be sure of what I believe in and what I'm fascinated by and curious about before I begin writing. It kind of one of my beliefs as a writer is that I think that what unites us more than anything else are the things that we cannot know. That they're not the things that we do know, because those things are the conditional things or the circumstantial things. But the mysteries of life are the things that we all share, and that we've shared ever since humans were around. And so I knew what mysteries I was interested in. I was interested in the relationship of the self with the self, in the idea of transactional relationships and relationships that defy transaction. And so I kind of had a purpose, in that kind of way. There was the kind of energy I knew that the book was going in. But in terms of all other aspects of the plot, it seems kind of ridiculous to say now, because when a book is finished, it looks so orderly, and it looks like it was always like the way that it is. But of course, there were so many dead ends, and there's so much on the cutting room floor. And I really kind of quite deliberately painted myself into a corner at every turn. I knew, for example, that I wanted to have a courtroom scene in the book, because I'd read The Brothers Karamazov and I thought that was super awesome. So I wanted I wanted to have an awesome courtroom scene, and I really like courtroom scenes when lawyers kind of just step out and suddenly say something super great, and you never expected it, and everything goes a different way. So in my plan for the novel, I had awesome courtroom scene in the future of the book, but I had no idea how to make that work. And it wasn't actually until I'd written many silly drafts of courtroom scenes where things weren't working that suddenly I realized that I could slightly reorder some of the information in the book and get the surprise that I wanted. So, you know, I mean, I think that surprise is really important when you're thinking about the reader's entertainment, because if the reader can see ahead, they're going to stop looking at the present moment because they're not going to care about it, because they're going to be thinking about the thing that they know is going to happen next. And so I feel as a writer it's very important, if you're writing something that you want to be suspenseful or surprising, to be continually doing the thing that you don't know. I mean, the most inconvenient thing for you is probably going to be the thing that the reader is going to be thinking, how are they going to get out of this situation? Which is brilliant, because then that's exactly what you want. So, I mean, it's funny to think of, because it seems so, when you look back at the novel, you kind of, I mean, I know already I'm forgetting some of, like, a great many of those dead ends. An example is, for a very long time in the draft, I had that the estate of the hermit, the kind of terrestrial character whose death begins the novel, had been purchased jointly by two of the characters. And it was because I was kind of just trying to jimmy them into the plot in some way. And it caused me such headaches until I realized that I could just actually change, you know, kind of change that. And that would work out kind of lead me down a completely different direction. But I now have completely forgotten about that, because this is the way that the book is now. So it's, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing to think about plot, because in a way, as an aspiring writer, when you go to the books that you love to read, you're seeing such a polished performance. You're seeing it as the writer wants it to be, and so it's quite difficult to learn from that, I think, sometimes, because you don't see backstage.
Thank you very much. I'm going to. Oh, okay. The waving has won, and the microphone is very close. And then I'm going to diversify to the right after that. But we're coming to this lady. Thank you.
Thank you. I was very pleased that you both started talking about place at the beginning, because I thought place was incredibly important to the novel. However, as an Aucklander and as a Londoner who's never been to Hokitika or Dunedin in my life, I was clueless about the places that you were talking about. And while you were mapping the heavens all the way through the book, and as an amateur astrologer, I could follow the heaven mapping, but there were no earthly maps. And I wondered if you actually used old maps, and if you did, if you could possibly persuade your publishers in the next print run to put some of them in the book.
Oh, well, I can. There is one in the paperback, because very many readers asked. No, in the blue covered paperback. There is one. It just came out this week, I think.
Oh, fantastic!
Yeah,
because both Hokitika and Dunedin and the Goldfields.
Yeah.
Well done, Granta, for meeting that.
I spent a lot of time on Google.
Well, so did I, actually. While I was writing the book, it's one of the kind of strange things about the Luminaries that I couldn't have written it without computers in so many ways. Though it's kind of a throwback novel in other ways. And, you know, using Google Earth is just fantastic for a novelist, because you can tell how long it takes to walk between 2 points, and I mean, it's just easy. I mean, I'm curious to know that you could follow the heavenly movement, but not the terrestrial movement, because in a way that makes you very, very unique, as peculiar as a reader, in that when I was writing the book, I had the strong sense that probably most of my readers wouldn't know anything about astrology, and a large proportion of those people wouldn't care anything about astrology. So at all times, I needed to be careful in how these two kind of levels of the book, I guess, were speaking to one another. And my ambition for the book was that I wanted to create a reading experience that was very like looking at the night sky, in the sense that the visible stuff, the plot of the book is appreciable. You know, everybody can see the Milky Way, and see the planets moving and so on and so forth. But that there was this other kind of layer of movement going on. So yeah, no, that's a really interesting comment.
I promised my right. So there's to this gentleman here, please, and then we'll see.
I can do a short one. To what extent did you have the present in mind when you were writing the book?
Short question. Might be a longer answer.
That's a really good question. Not at all, I think. Except, well, I should say that the reader's present at all times. You know, trying to see if I could inhabit as much as possible the reader's experience at every point in writing the book, or keep a handle on it at least, in terms of what the reader already knew, wanted to know, and didn't know they wanted to know yet, but I was going to try and make them want that. You know, there's kind of these layers of the reader's experience that you have to try and harness and keep in mind. But in terms of kind of world events and that kind of thing, not really at all, I think. You know, the financial crisis happened while I was writing this book, and I think that, you know, I mean, I think that if it has informed, it's obviously informed me, but I don't think that it has informed the book in a way that was conscious. I wasn't trying to write a book for the contemporary world, but a book that I would want to read, I guess. Yes, I think that, you know, particularly in New Zealand, you know, my father has taught in a university in New Zealand for a very long time, and while I was writing this book, retired in protest, or left the university in protest, because he was so disgusted by the way in which the university had become increasingly corporatized and had lost sight of both the ideal at one end of high scholarship and the ideal at the other end of serving its formerly students, now consumers, or even more cynically, products, you know. And I think that being part of his pain as he left the job that had been his job throughout his whole life, and emailing him and talking with him about it, really did make its way into the novel, but probably not in a way that is anything other than thematic or atmospheric, if that makes sense.
Your dad sounds great.
Yes, it's funny actually. Somebody made the comment to me quite recently that I talk about my dad a lot in literary festivals and on stage, and I never talk about my mum. And I think the reason for that is that I know that my mum would just really hate it, because she's a much more private person than my dad is actually, and she wouldn't like it if I talked about her. So it's not that I kind of have this special relationship with my dad that I don't have with my mum. It's just that I'm kind of protecting her, I guess.
I'm actually going to count that as two questions.
I'm sorry, that was my fault.
No, and they're wonderful ones, very different ones to end.
Well, how marvellous it is that, just as you might think, fiction had reached its last possibilities in scope, technique, subject, a writer comes along to disabuse you of those fears. Eleanor, thank you so much for, I hate the pun, but such an illuminating interview, and for your frankness and modesty with which you've answered these questions, and to Robert for so sympathetically eliciting them. And thank you too to Kerry Fox, wherever she is, for her reading. She tells me that you can meet her again on Sunday on BBC One's The Crimson Fields. Just one notice. Eleanor is going to sign books at the back of the hall here. Those who wish to have signed books, perhaps you could remain in your seats for a minute or two, while those who don't will slink away to the shamefaced to the exits. So it just remains for me, once again, to thank our sponsors, to thank you for coming, and above all, to thank Eleanor and Robert.